Somewhere back in Dephobus's mind was a wall with a door set into it. The door was of solid steel and a lock that could not be picked or broken. Only Dephobus himself could open it. Behind the door was part of him that dealt with death. There was so much death around a space marine that his place had to be sealed off, partly by years of hypno training and mental exercises, and partly by Dephobus's raw mental strength. To keep it from being overwhelmed, the door opened. The dead man's memories flooded through. Like his body, they were decayed and fragmented. His brain turned to mush, and Dephobus imagined himself standing knee-deep in it, scraps of sensations floating past in the gory soup. A recurring dream, something that surfaced again and again, was of drowning, falling into a dark, cold abyss, and struggling for breath, then oblivious. Each time this man had slept, that had been what he had seen. Another was of pain, not in great waves or great episodes of agony, but constant, a prickling, a direct stimulation of the nerves, in what Dephobus recognized as treatment to improve reactions, as well as gauge resistance to pain. Dephobus had gone through it himself in the early stages of his transformation into a space marine, though those memories seemed to belong to a different man now. And there was nothing. Dephobus sifted through the torn memories. There was just darkness, endless tracks of darkness, where childhood should have been, or adolescence, or a career as the soldier this man clearly had been, all gone, stripped out, painted over with nothing. Dephobus reversed the flow of memories. They seeped past the death barrier. He crammed them into the space beyond the shut door. "We have found the source of the off-world troops," said Dephobus. "They are mind-wiped, sleet-taught elites. They were programmed here." "By who?" said Lysander. "That was scrubbed away," said Dephobus. "If this man ever knew in the first place." Sergeant Septurian emerged from an archway leading into a side passage. Septurian was an assault veteran and looked it, his armor carefully painted with dozens of kill markings, and trophies of fangs and jawbones, hanging from the length of his chainsword. "The rest of this floor is barracks and training rooms," he said. "Nothing to kill." He sounded slightly disappointed. "Any more bodies?" asked Lysander. "Not yet, but it goes down." "Then so do we." "Who do you think built this?" said Dephobus. "Who trained these men?" "I have my own opinions on that," said Lysander. "But I do not place any value in opinions. When it becomes a fact, then I shall act upon it. Septuron, what is on the lower levels?" "I know nothing, Captain, but something down there is drawing power." Lysander led the way out of the chamber, leaving the sorry remains of the dead soldiers spreading on the floor. Septarian and Dephobus followed, treading carefully on the shadows that clung everywhere. The light here was dim, afforded by only a few glow globes. The facility was powered down, running on minimum. The barracks rooms were devoid of decoration, of signs that human beings had lived there, save for the inscriptions carved on the black walls. "In obedience," read one. "In ignorance," read another. Each footlocker contained a standard imperial prayer book and nothing else. Below, the air was colder. The narrow metal staircase spiraled down to the level of the grinder. The floor here was open to the machine's gnarled teeth. To Lysander's eye, the grinding cylinders looked configured to shred flesh and crunch bone, but he could not be sure. They were clean. Even the oil had been stripped away, and patches of the metal were faintly pitted as if by acid. A hatch on the floor was sealed by a wheel lock. Lysander knelt to open it. "Wait," said Dephobus. Lysander looked up at him. "This chamber is shielded," said the librarian, "but the sensations beyond are leaking out, just enough to be sure." "Of what?" "A moral threat." "This world has enough of those," said Lysander. "We will destroy one more. Cespin, Septurian, at the ready." Septurian's squad drew their chain blades. The chamber hummed with the whirring of the blade's teeth. Squad Cespin descended the stairs and lined up, bolters ready to cut down anything that got past Lysander's hammer and Septurin's blades. Lysander hauled the wheel round. The hatch swung open. The stench was appalling. The death above had been one thing. The death from below was a distillation of rot, a breath from hell. The dim light touched wet ridges of foulness. The chamber beyond the grinder was coated, walls and floor, in rotting gore. Some of it had dried to stringy, spongy masses of shredded flesh. Others still oozing as if shed only moments before. The stench rolled up in thick, filthy waves. Lysander stared at the mass for a moment. "Dephobus?" he asked. "I can go on, Captain," came the reply. "It is painful, but I can go on." Dephobus swung down the chamber. Bones crunched under feet. He could see skulls, pelvises, ribs, femurs, half buried in the sludge. "How many legends are buried here?" he said. "Tales of people gone missing from Opus's cities. Snatched away by monsters or ghosts? How many ended up in this place?" In the middle of the chamber was a standing stone. Moss still clung to it, as if it had been ripped out of some forgotten forest. Chiseled to the surface were runes that could not be focused on. Lysander's eyes slid off them, as if afraid of what would happen if he read them. Sergeant Septurin was next down. He could not keep the disgust off his face. "What are we doing down here?" he said. "Sacrifices," Lysander said. "It's a beacon," said Dephobus from above. "It is calling out, screaming. When this place was opened up and active, thrown alive, it is deafening to me now. It must have reached out." "Light years," said Lysander. The chamber shuddered. The gory filth squirmed like a mass of vermin. Septurin almost lost his footing as the floor shifted. With a cry of torn metal, the walls parted. Lysander had the sense of space and depth beyond. From below and all around came the sound of stone against metal. The grinding cylinders overhead shuddered, and scraps of flesh fell from between their teeth, where the cleaning above had missed them. "Hold on!" yelled Septurin. The floor gave way beneath the two space marines. Lysander grabbed a beam that pierced the wall as the chamber deformed, his legs suddenly kicking out over a great drop that fell away to darkness. The standing stone was the capstone of an enormous obelisk. The shaft to contain it speared down far below the facility. Rings of walkways were even now falling away with the shaking of the chamber. One wall fell in, revealing the stone wall of the shaft. Septurin went with it, falling to the blackness. Lightning crackled down there, illuminating Septurin as he slammed into one of the walkways. It held just. Multicolored fire swirled around the base of the obelisk. Lysander could see the carvings that covered it, geometric patterns that broke into biological swirls and back again. Lysander could see shapes in the fire. They leapt and shrieked. Demons, the predators of the warp, animalistic, always hungry, unclean and damned. Lysander let go and fell, plummeting towards the demons, swarming up at Septurin. He hit one of the walkways hard. It parted under him, but arrested his fall. He fell past Septurin into the mist of demons. They were something like wolves, something like lizards, something like shapes conjured by the mind's eye from the random flickering of a flame. Their fur writhed like nests of worms. Their eyes rolled in pits along their necks, and their faces were nothing but a lopsided circular maw, ringed with teeth, like a deep-sea predator. Lysander swatted one against the wall. The stone wall, he saw now, carved with thousands of asymmetrical faces. He pivoted on his front foot and swept the fist of Dorn around him, feeling the shock of impacts run up his arm. The space let one demon in. Lysander stamped down on its neck and felt vertebrae shattering. Septurin vaulted down and landed next to him. His chain blade screamed as he plunged it down to the back of one demon. He blasted holes in the torso with his bolt pistol. Lysander followed up and crushed its head into the floor with a downward swing of his hammer. In the name of the Emperor Most High, in the name of Rogel Dorn, all the hate that you have drunk from my people, all the suffering you have wrought, I now repay. Lysander didn't have to look up now to know that Phoebus had jumped down to the pit after him. Lines of white light scribbled across the floor, and the demon's flesh burned where the light touched it. Geometric wards taught to the Phoebus, and the chapter librarium flared bright, and the demons were thrown back. I banish thee, yelled the Phoebus. He jumped down from the walkway and landed beside Lysander. To the warp, to oblivion I banish thee. And that gate, through which you may not return, yelled Lysander, is manned by an imperial fist. The demons were shrieking and burning. Lysander waded into them, hacking left and right with the fist of Dorn, feeling the hammer slamming the demons aside at the apex of each pendular swing. Against one wall turned a mass of liquid rock, like bubbling mud, with shapes of more demons pushing against it from the other side. A clawed forelimb reached out of the wall, like the hand of a drowning man from the surface of quicksand. Lysander rammed his shoulder against the wall, driving the demon back out of reality. Dephobus was at his side, tracing glowing symbols in the air that scorched against the portal in the wall. Demons writhed, trapped in the solidifying mass. The gnashing maw of a demon pushed through the wall. Lysander slammed his storm shield into it, and Dephobus traced the final syllable of their banishment rite. The portal solidified, encasing the demon in stone, and the screams from the other side died away. Lysander stepped back, drawing in deep breaths. Is there any place on this planet that is not rotten? He said. If there is, Opus has hidden it well, said Dephobus. Lysander saw the librarian's face was pallid and waxy, running with sweat. A space marine rarely looked weak, but the effort of the banishment had taken most of what Dephobus had. Speak, brother, said Lysander, if you wish. Dephobus shook his head. We go on, there are answers here, and I will not take a backward step. Good, we are with you. And I with you, Captain. Who do you think this was? Septurin said from the other side of the shaft. Against the wall hung the upper half of a man, bisected at the waist, fixed to the rock with rivets to the elbows, wrists, and collarbones. Into his chest was carved an intricate mass of runes and symbols. The other Imperial fists were climbing down what remained of ladders and walkways. They passed the whole length into the obelisk. The blood that ran down it had pooled in the incense runes and picked out its language in rust red. Lysander walked up to Septurin and the sorry, withered half-corpse on the wall. Can you read this? He said to Dephobus. Dephobus peered at the incisions in the man's chest. I wish that I could not, he said. But yes, it makes itself legible to the third eye, the sight within the psyche, and it is a contract. Dephobus swallowed and ran a finger along the dried-out skin, following the lines of script. Made by... The name cannot be read. It is probably a ritual name, used to conceal the author's true name. That means the author was present when this pact was made. It says that under pain of the very worst of the warp, the very foulest depredations of the dark gods, the six-fingered one, also named Carnacal. This Carnacal is born by the threat of such punishments to serve the author in exchange for his existence being spared. The power to create this bond was through conquest. Carnacal's life was spared, and so that life belonged to the author. Dephobus took a step back. Carnacal's six-finger was at Kazil, he said. He was one of the moral threats that attacked on K-Day. And he was summoned here, said Lysander, and bound into service by whoever built this obelisk. Fieldhammer arrived under his own power, said Dephobus, but he was afraid of someone, Maybe someone he was forced to serve. I would wager, said Lysander, that there was once a soul hanging here with the contract binding Filthhammer into service too. There's another way out here, said Sergeant Kirev. He had made it to the bottom of the shaft, along with the fire team, and was examining a sealed door in the wall. Open it. Be ready to fight, said Lysander. Kirev kicked the door open. The door sheared off its hinges and boomed as it landed on the other side. But there was no other sound, save the hum of power cabling. Beyond was a medical facility. 3 auto surgeons were fixed to the ceiling, their scalpel-tipped limbs folded up and indication rooms dark. Several autopsy slabs were fixed into one wall. In the immense dimness, Lysander could make out cabinets of medical implements and monitoring equipment. In the middle of the room was a cabinet surrounded by a thick ribbed piping, from which issued a freezing haze that clung to the floor. The cabinet was the size and shape of a coffin, with a glass lid, and was frosted over. Lysander walked up to it, trying to see what was inside. He wiped a gauntlet across the lid. The frost was cleared. A skull stared back at him. Not a real human skull. A mask shaped like a skull, with intricate targeting lenses, and the eye sockets, and an armored collar around its neck, giving way to black synth skin, with hexagonal armored scales. Kirov stood behind Lysander. "What is it?" he asked. "Averser," said Lysander. "It's an averser." "An assassin?" said Kirov. "Have you ever fought alongside an agent of the Officio Assassinorium?" said Lysander. "I have not." "It is like death itself is on your side. Like the enemy's shadow has come alive and turned on him. I have never seen such death as dealt out by an imperial assassin. That is what lies here, brothers. Death incarnate, harnessed as a weapon of the Imperium." Dephobus had entered the chamber and held a hand over the coffin. He shook his head, as if greeted by silence. "What is one doing in this place?" he said. "It's in storage," said Kirov. "This is an official Assassinorium facility. They must have built this place." "And the obelisk?" countered Dephobius. "Did they build that too?" Lysander stood back from the assassin's coffin. "They have done more than that on Opus," he said. "Here!" He took from his belt the fragment of metal that had been recovered from the Temple of Muses, the item stored there by Acolyte Seric. "This is the bullet that killed Inquisitor Keltrips. I saw its kind being loaded into an Exodus long rifle, the weapon of a Vindicare assassin. It is a shield breaker round, doubtless employed in case Keltrips was protected by a personal energy shield. Only the Vindicare assassin has access to such rare technology." The official Assassinorium started this war when one of their agents shot down Keltrips. This war, the moral threats that infest Opus, the official Assassinorium is at the heart of it all. Seric's bullet placed the suspicion in my heart. But this was not enough. This place was enough. "Could they have assassins operating on Opus now?" asked Dephobus. "At least one," said Lysander. "The bullet matches the fragments pulled out of Scout Grayus and Sergeant Orphos's arm. It was probably fired by the same Vindicare who killed Keltrips." "And to think," said Dephobus, "we came here to find answers. I do not hear the answer to anything. What does it benefit the Assassinorum to have a war on Opus? What could be worth the heresy of trafficking with demons?" He looked down at the Averser's skull mask. "We must open this." Kirov held up a hand. "That would be..." Lysander hefted the fist of Dorn and smashed it in the coffin's lid. Freezing vapor poured out and rolled across the floor. "If it stirs," said Lysander, "we must kill it before it can strike." The Assassinorium designated the Averser as a spree killer. It will attack without pause until it is destroyed. The Phobos held his hand out over the aversor's mask. With the frosted glass gone, the assassin's breathing was just perceptible, greatly slowed down. Anything? Said Lysander. The Phobos' head creased in concentration. He's been emptied out, he said. Everything has been replaced with rage. I've never felt anything so pure. The Phobos' eyes opened. There is a name. Who? Said Lysander. The Phobos looked at the captain. Legionstrasse, he said. A prophet, a hermit, who had lived for the better part of a century in the hooded hills, 1,000 kilometers northwest of Kazale, emerged from his cave as morning broke. Streams of people were making their way across the trackless wilderness. Through this bleak landscape, where the temperature belt across the middle of the continent met the chill Arctic climate, and gave way to carnivorous forests, then tundra, then snowy wastes. They had traveled from the towns and cities that owed their allegiances to Kazale. They knew that the Imperium was killing everything in Kazale, and in Rakaba, across the sea. They knew they would be next, so they had gathered everything they could carry and left their homes. In ages past, their peoples had fled to hidden settlements in the north, nomadic towns that could move on horseback as the seasons and enemy attacks required. So, they made their way now, in their hundreds of thousands, in their millions, in ragged caravans, trudging into regions where winter never lost its grip. The hermit found one such caravan. 300 men, women, and children, trundling along with a few vehicles that still had fuel, with the stronger ones on foot. My brothers and sisters, he cried, my sons and my daughters, it pains me so to see such misery on your faces. Ah, it was to escape such sorrow I made this cave my home. Come, I have food with water, and the warmth of my fire, enough for all of you. From the grief on your faces, I see you've already lost many loved ones. You need lose no more. Come, share in what little I have. The prophet was happy to see them file in the cave, gratitude in their eyes. They had not seen a friendly face since they had abandoned their homes, and had known nothing but misery since then. What made the prophet particularly happy was that a serpent had come to him 2 years before, a mighty crimson snake with scales that shone, and which sang on beautiful voice, about the gods who dwelt beyond the veil. The snake was always hungry, and the prophet clamped down with joy when he heard the sound of it feeding. The screams mingled with the sound of its jaws as it crunched through bone, and it made the most wonderful music. Finally the snake emerged. You have done well, it said. When I was brought to this world, I feared I would perish. Now I am strong. Now I can fulfill the purpose to which I am bound. War is coming, and I must fight. Finally, the wave serpent, as its worshipper had called it, ate the prophet, who cared for it, and slithered its way across the waste toward the coming battle. The concentric rings of Lure stood as the only memory to a civilization that was long dead when the age of the Imperium began, the foundations of a metropolis that had presumably thrived when the climate of the continent's north was more hospitable. Now drifts have gathered among the stones, all but bearing the outer rings, where the paupers and foreigners had lived, and crowning the taller walls of the inner palace district. Lure provided rare shelter from the snows and wind chills. The western coast had few large settlements, and those that existed were now empty, drained of their population by the decrees of the Aristia. A colony of more than 1,000 such evacuees made it to Lure, setting up their tents and makeshift dormitories among the low walls that remained of those ancient homes. The leader of the evacuees was an old man, a scholar of leadership and heredity who had been educated as one of the universities of Gazelle. He accompanied the sturdy younger women and men who explored the interior of Lure, seeking better shelter, perhaps somewhere underground that could be used in the event of a blizzard. When they returned, only the leader remained. On his face was a brand with 8 points, and 3 fingers had been severed from his left hand. He was singing as if he walked through the snows, a dirge that rose and fell as he sang about beautiful creatures that roosted in a chamber of crystal, of a city in the sky carved from ivory, of silver towers standing against an endless black ocean. The people heard the song. Through its tone and its words, the creature that had layered in Lure made its way into their minds. It had abandoned its body long ago, finding a physical form a tiresome liability, and existed only as thoughts. It had been worshipped once by a cult of intellectuals and artists who sacrificed what they created to it. Now these ragged, desperate men and women would have to do. It divided itself into 1,000 fragments, each with a hunger equal to the whole. Those people, huddled, screaming in Lure as their minds disintegrated, felt their flesh burning as 8-pointed scars rose on their skin. Black tears rolled from their eyes. They shuddered and thrashed, bones cracking under the strain. They walked off to the snows. They were hungry. The creature who had layered in Lure had not drunk of any souls for almost 5 years, since it had been torn from its native steppes of the warp and plunged into Opus. Some of their memories were delicious: terror, love, abandonment, betrayal, joy. But they were never enough. They still hungered, and many lost souls were wandering those wastes, eager to band up with other survivors of the walk north. And so 1,000 walkers of Lure spread out, all eager to propagate the seeds of the creature they carried inside them. The Aristia had their hunting lodges and hideaways. Some of them have even made it from Gazelle or Rubaka, or all the way from Makasham, in defense of the Imperial attempts to round them up, and they were now lying low in those secret places. But none of them maintained the presence that they had any real authority over the millions of people flittering through the southern regions and the coasts. That honor belonged to the recent visitors, the usurpers. They were everywhere. They had layered here, in the seemingly lifeless regions of the continent, knowing all along that they would have millions of refugees to use. They were witches and demon-possessed, sorcerers and arch-mutants. The Aristia hated them, those who still had their own minds, not because they were heretics and demons, but because they were new. They had no 1,000-year family tree to look back on. They had no history of conquest and superiority to justify their power. No one dared voice their hatred. Fully 1/3 of Aristia had disappeared in the 5 years since the invasion began. Another third were not themselves, brainwashed, possessed, or mad. The remainder stayed silent and cowered where they could. The ones who made it out of the cities told themselves they were lucky, but they did not believe it. The armies of the north were gathering whether the Aristia wanted it or not. A mighty mountain range, the Thornfolds, broke down into valleys and ranges of foothills, in which hundreds of thousands could hide. Legends told of how the Thornfolds held up to the sky, or how they were petrified remains of a race of giants who built Opus. Now their shadows concealed the champions of chaos as they stood, surrounded by halos of crackling power, drawing towards them the vast hordes that headed here seeking survival and freedom. "Seek liberation and blood!" cried the warp serpent, crimson jaws and golden teeth snapping as it spoke. "Sweep down and put the invaders to the sword. Only in death can the imperial yoke be cast off. We are one," said 1,000 walkers. "We are you, and so you are one. In unity we will triumph." The Imperium believe they are 1,000,000 individuals to be lined up and murdered one at a time, but they face one being, one mighty, infinitely powerful warrior, and they will be crushed. To arms! Bellowed Carnical Six Fingers, surrounded by a veil of mist, as his molten armor met the freezing air. To war and malice, bathe your hearts, and rage cleanse your souls, and war alone honor your gods. At the same moment, well south of the Thornholds, Operation Starfall was in effect. A line of Imperial Guard from the Card Dunash Obsidian Legion on the extreme left of the 90th Abigail Siegebreakers anchored the right, was strung across a region of broken river deltas and coniferous forests, where the temperature met tundra. The open areas, floodplains between river tributaries and rocky dry deserts, were overlooked by the basilisks and griffins of the Lord Governor's artillery and the flight paths of the Navy Starfall Flight Group. Hundreds of thousands of men were committed, almost as many as in Kazale and Rakaba, and the majority of the strike force's vehicles and aircraft. Operation Starfall could not fail. Kazale might hold out. Rakaba might refuse to break. Either eventually could be dealt with in the long term, even if both cities had to be bombed to dust. But if the battle here was lost, the whole strike force would be driven off the planet by an army sweeping south. Chikapov ordered the Lord Colonel of the Obsidian Legion, Lausus Kudelbrecht, as the commander of Operation Starfall. Kudelbrecht had earned his stripes in the crushing of the prison world rebellion on Dorholtz, and was said to be a man who engendered greater fear in his troopers than the enemy. His first act was to set up gibbets all along the front line, standing proud of the trenches and gun emplacements, where field punishments could be enacted in full view of as many guardsmen as possible. Starfall would not fail while Kudelbrecht was still standing. Regimental battle scribes began naming potential battles in anticipation. Many features of the region didn't have names, and received them only so the guard regiments stationed there might have a name to embroider on their standards. Skitzelman Hills, the Blutwald, Greenfire and Lower Mance Forests, the River Expiatus. Recon fighters made flyovers and brought back news of vast, ragged columns, openly led by moral threats. 500,000 men were making their way through the passes of the Thornhold foothills. 200,000 were following the rivers that flowed southwards from the mountains, and met the strong points in the guard line head-on. Imperial preachers set up the chapels along the trench works. There was not one single guardsman or naval armman who did not kneel or hear a sermon. Kudelbrecht himself took confession and needed 4 straight hours before he was ready to be richly scourged. There were no atheists in Operation Starfall. The first sighting shells from the Imperial artillery fell. They landed some way short of the main column, some way to the right of the Imperial center, out on an enemy force assumed to be led by the traitor marine known as Carnical Six Fingers. The second shot was a bolt of crimson lightning that fell from the ice-clear sky, incinerating more than 40 men of the 90 Aegol Siegebreakers. The 100 battles of Operation Starfall had begun.